right. I'm really happy to be here. This is a wonderful institution. It's something that I've just recently been introduced to formally, and it's just astounding the volume of talks and information and discovery of life that I've been able to see. So I'm very happy and thankful to be here. So most TED Talks that I've seen tend to specify about a specific idea and how that idea is applied. And I wanted to do a little something different. I wanted to actually focus on the idea itself, or perhaps the anatomy of the idea. And what I mean by that is every good idea that is realized seems to have components to it. There's always the inspiration, the passion behind it that allows that idea to form in the first place. And then there's the machinery of the idea, the actual execution part of it. And I think that's a very important thing to consider, because everything in this world that has come of thoughtful process is an idea. And there are many good ideas that never came to fruition, and many that did. And so I'm going to share some of my life experiences. I feel like I've been in a position to learn how to problem solve and find my way over obstacles that seemed insurmountable. And I think there's a reproducible process. So, moving right ahead. Haiti, 2010. Everybody remembers what was a horrendous event of biblical proportions, an earthquake that created an unbelievable amount of devastation in Haiti, killed thousands of people, and created misery like we could only imagine. It's one of those few times that the media didn't overblow how bad something was. And I remember being riveted by the images the first day this came through. And as we talked about, I'm a surgeon, and I do a lot of trauma surgery as well. And I remember thinking, I've got to get down there. This is one of those once-in-a-lifetime situations where I can really go and use what I've been given, my skills as a surgeon, to get in there and help out. And so I was truly obsessed with doing that. And so I immediately got in contact with Doctors Without Borders. I got in contact with Partners in Health, the really big aid organizations. And I said, okay, guys, I'm ready to go. Put me on the next plane. I'll go as long as you need to. And much to my chagrin and surprise, they didn't need me. They said, that's not how we do things. I didn't realize they take months to vet and screen potential medical providers for these organizations, which makes a lot of sense. And so I really ran into a brick wall. And that idea right there could have stopped. That could have been a really good idea that I had looked into and just didn't come to fruition. But I wasn't going to let it die. It was something I felt very powerful about. And I knew I had the passion. I knew I was inspired enough to try to make this idea work. I just didn't know how to execute it. And I wasn't sure until the next morning when I took a look at the paper and read an article. But we'll get back to that in just a second. So, as we've said a couple times already, I'm a surgeon. And my job is very unusual in that it has a lot of different decision-making situations happening on a daily basis. I am constantly in a situation where I'm doing a complex operation. I'm taking care of a trauma patient where I don't exactly know how I'm going to fix the problem. I don't know how I'm going to solve the complexity of what's going on. But I've been taught a process. And I've been taught to take the big picture and break it down into pieces and focus and prioritize with those pieces and move to the next one. And as I go along, I stick to that. It's reproducible. And that's how we complete these operations. That's how we save patients. And it's something that I try to apply to my everyday life. I'm also a mountain climber. It's a passion of mine. And one of the things that I love about mountaineering, amongst the many attributes it has, is the challenge that you are faced with when you're sitting at the base of the valley or the parking lot at the base of this mountain, looking at this huge monolith in front of you. It's overwhelming, it's intimidating, and you're thinking, how in the heck am I ever going to get on top of this thing? And I love that as much as I hate it, because it's just overwhelming. But there's a process, and this is what I've learned. You don't stare at the top of the summit the whole way up. You get tired and you want to quit. You break it into pieces. You focus and prioritize, and you really try to make this a small event and many small events that get added up to become the sum of the climb. And there's actually a technique in mountain climbing called rest stepping. And it's something as subtle as resting on a straight leg with your hip rotating that gives your muscles in your legs about a second or two rest. And you keep doing that as you're taking these slow, methodical steps. Well, as that's coming along, you're saving incremental amounts of energy. And it doesn't seem like it's a lot at the time, but at 18,000 feet, I can assure you it adds up. And when you are exhausted and in the middle of one of many pitches up a mountainside, you're not looking at the false summit, you're not looking at the top of the ridge, you're thinking, I've got 50 rest steps to go. I'm going to do my 50 rest steps, and I'm going to reevaluate, and we'll go from there. And that's how I do it. And that's how the other mountaineers I climb with do it as well. And it's a reproducible way to achieve a goal that seems like maybe you can't do it. And before you know it, you're trudging along, and you have the summit in view, and it makes it all worthwhile. Fortunately, you forget about a lot of the pain when you get back down to the car. So that's how you keep showing up and doing this. So back to our newspaper article. So I have this idea about going to Haiti. I don't know how I'm going to get down there. I don't know how I'm going to make it happen. But I see a newspaper article the next day about a church group from Glede that is actually trying to redirect their dental mission, which is just coincidentally in January every year, to Haiti to help with the disaster. And it sounds like a perfect opportunity to match what I have to offer with what they have to offer. So I communicate with them, and before you know it, we're recruiting nurses, we're talking to the hospitals. Both the hospitals in town are contributing all kinds of medical supplies. It was a miracle come together in 48 to 72 hours around there. And it was something that, oh, I thought that was up, sorry. It was something that in itself was an incredible feat to get everything together and everybody on board in that short amount of time. So we got our bags packed, we got everything set up, and the next thing you know, we were flying to Santo Domingo, which is the capital of the Dominican Republic, which is the eastern side of the island of Hispaniola. You can see here. Haiti is, of course, the western side of this island, and it's down in the Caribbean. So we'll get back to that in a second as well. So moving back to the medical side of things. I'm a trauma surgeon as well as a general surgeon. It's something that's a very big part of my practice and a big part of my life. And one of the things that happens on a pretty frequent basis is I get a phone call about somebody getting run over, shot in a major motor vehicle collision, and they're critically ill, and I have to come in and take care of it. And this is the scene that I'm typically met with when I walk into the trauma bay. It's utter chaos. There's a million things going on. There's vitals for the patient. There's technicians and nurses telling me things. I've got to take in all that information, and I've got to get it right. I've got to cut out all that noise because it's my responsibility to save that patient's life. And so trauma surgeons have been trained over the years to do the same process that I'm talking about. Prioritize, focus, and take care of everything in small pieces and put the puzzle back later. There's actually an A, B, C, D, E sequence that we follow for evaluating trauma patients. It is effective and it's reproducible, and it cuts the noise out of all the other business going on. Now, once we get that patient to the operating room, it's the same process. Instead of opening up the abdomen and being encountered with 2 liters of blood and just an utter mess that's incredibly intimidating and overwhelming, You settle down, you follow the process, the reproducible process, focus on the priorities, stop the bleeding, move on, find out what else is going on, and suddenly you fix the problem, and it's reproducible. So it's something that I have used as part of my training and tried to apply it how I look at overcoming things in my personal life. So back to our Haitian journey. We fly into Santo Domingo, which is the capital, and we're met with our first round of challenges in country. First of all, the customs officials of the Dominican Republic were not too happy about having a bunch of surgical supplies and medications brought into their country without advance notice. So we had to wrangle that, get all that set up, and then find transportation, because we were still a 12-hour drive away from where we were headed. And so after 2 attempts fell through, we finally got on board with a couple minivans and crammed ourselves in and had a really tough 12-hour journey to the border of Haiti. And as we rolled across, we came across the little town of Jemani. Jemani is really a very nondescript place normally, but there was a very fledgling field hospital that was being formed at that time. And at the time, I remember thinking, I can't believe we actually made it here. It's crazy that we were able to get through all the obstacles and actually show up here. But little did I know that was just the beginning of the set of challenges that was ahead of us. So I'm going to take another direction here and talk about another experience. We all remember Hurricane Katrina 10 years ago in New Orleans. I was living in New Orleans at that time and training at my residency at Charity Hospital, which is an incredibly old, established entity down there. This is actually a picture from the hurricane. I wrote it out at my house with my dog, Hambone, and it was just him and I checking it out. And you know, it was a hurricane for sure. There was a lot of water, there was a lot of blowing and stuff going down the street. But I'll be honest, it wasn't earth-shattering at the time. This is right in front of my front porch later in the day. I was working still on a schedule, and there was no power, but everything was pretty reasonable, at least until 2 days later when the levees broke. And when the levees broke, that's when everything broke loose. And it was an incredibly different situation and a real tragedy for the city. Everyone knows it's in the area of 1,000 deaths and billions of dollars of damage. So it was an unbelievable hit for the city. I was working in Charity Hospital during those first 2 or 3 days, taking care of patients with no power because the architects of the hospital had put the generators in the basement. And that's what flooded first. So we had no reserve generator function, and so it was a real nightmare. And the first thing that we could do is to get these people out of the hospital and get them out of New Orleans because it was a horrible place for them to be. So we started medevacing on day 2, and we got just about everybody out of our hospital by that day 3. Now, when it came down to us being evacuated, I realized I had a huge problem. I have a Hambone back at my house with nobody to take care of him, and the National Guard is telling me, we can't medevac animals, only human beings. So I had to make a decision. I had to stay with him and figure out how I was going to get out of there. One of the problems that I also had more or less made for myself is that I had parked my Ford Explorer in a parking garage next to the hospital before the hurricane, thinking I was smarter than everyone else because I was going to have it protected. And of course, that garage was under 4 feet of water. And being a poor surgical resident who didn't take care of anything in his personal life, the gas gauge was on E. So I had a Ford Explorer with no gas that was trapped in a garage. So there really was no way to go. So I got a bunch of water from the National Guard and some MREs, which are these military rations, and I lived for about 6 days. Just Hambone and I roaming the streets. That's a TED Talk in itself. But it was an exercise in difficulty. I watched the water every day and waited for it to drop, and when it finally got down to the point where I thought I could drive my Ford Explorer through the water to the dry part of the city and get out of there, I went and took a look at things. And I realized, and I was very unhappy when I found this out, that there was a pretty good-sized dip at the street as you drove out of the parking garage, which added about a foot to the depth of the water. So I thought, I would never get out of here. This definitely will drown my engine if I try to go that way. And I still hadn't had the gas thing sorted out. So then I thought to myself, I've really got to start working on my problems here. It's time to start prioritizing and focusing on this and getting it done. So I spent the next day and a half dragging sandbags from dry portions of the downtown to the water's edge, and had about 24 of them set up, and then commandeered a canoe that was, strangely enough, laying on the street next to the water in the downtown area, used that to bring the sandbags over, and actually did a pretty good job of sandbagging that area to where I thought I could drive on the sidewalk. Then I started thinking about the gas. And that's another story altogether. I thought, well, there's only one way to get gas when the gas station isn't open. I'll siphon it. I've seen it on TV. It can't be that hard. But I can tell you, it's incredibly hard, if not impossible, because all modern cars actually have a screen or a barrier to get the hose in there. So thank God for this type of gas tank that opens up from behind the license plate. I found 2 old Oldsmobile sedans that I was able to get gas out of. But it was an ugly experience, and I'm glad nobody was there to see it, because I didn't behave like a man. But at this point, I now have gas, and I rev the car up, and I take off, and I actually make it over the sandbags and up to the sidewalk, and I make the 200 meters to the dry area of downtown, and I'm ecstatic. I think, I am out of here. Let me go pick up Hambone, and let's cruise. And so when I get home, this is what I'm met with. A fiery inferno, fortunately not my house, but the house next to it and the 2 houses behind it. Somebody had knocked over a candle and just started a crazy fire. No fire department to take care of it. The best they could manage they were dropping water bombs by helicopter. The military showed up to kind of keep some order, but I sat there for 4 hours and watched it, just thinking for sure my house is toast and I'm going to lose everything. By the grace of God, it did not happen, at least the grace of God to me, and the wind shifted a little bit and my house didn't burn down. So the fire was brought under control. I got my dog, we got in the Explorer, and we got out of there. And I thought back later, that was one ridiculous experience. And when I really thought about it, I thought, I lingered for a couple days. I didn't really do what I should have done to really focus and problem solve. And once I did do that, I applied a process to something that could be solved, and I was able to get out of there. So I thought that was a pretty good example. So moving right along to Jemani again. So we show up at this hospital that's not really a hospital. It's a clinic with really, as you'll see, hundreds of patients in the fields around it. And the reason they're outside is because, 1, there's no room inside this little clinic, and 2, there is absolutely no way you're getting those patients into a building. They would not go in the building because they were afraid of aftershocks. They were terrified. And so at night they stayed there, during the daytime, and these are severely injured people who had been brought from Port-au-Prince. And so there was a team of Spanish and French and Guatemalan aid workers, as well as a bunch of people from the U.S., Harvard and University of Miami, and of course, Yakima. And we joined the team. And they set us up nicely in a little operating room. And I was really worried going into it, thinking, I don't have all the stuff I normally do. These are going to be really sick patients. How are we going to take care of this? And I was really surprised that if you have a team that works well together and you use your head about making good decisions and doing things that are really necessary versus just routine, we did great. We operated probably 14 hours a day. We were there for 10 days, did over 100 operations, and that was just our little piece of the pie. It was an amazing experience, and we helped deliver twins. We did a bunch of other things that something we normally wouldn't be doing in the medical realm. So it was an experience I will never forget. We even were able to hook up with the USS Comfort and get our most critical patients out by Sea Stallion, which I rode on one of those drop-offs, and that was one of the most exhilarating rides of my life. So as awesome as that was for me and the gratification I felt, it was really, and I'm not totally surprised by this, but I guess I am, it was really about the Haitian people. The Haitian people were the most gracious and thankful people that I had been around, especially in a situation like this. These folks have spent their lives with nobody giving a damn about them from a government standpoint, and to have a bunch of strangers show up at their greatest moment of need really touched them. And an amputation is never a happy operation, never is. But I could not believe the optimism and the positivity from these folks who were just happy to be alive and get themselves back to living. So, an incredible experience. So we pack up everything, and I get home back to the Palm Springs of Washington, and I had a lot of time to reflect. And I said, you know, how do I take this to the next step? I think we did something really special in Haiti, and I think we can reproduce it. And I think we can form a nonprofit and take this to other countries. And I was met with a lot of resistance. You can't do this. This is not something that you can do by yourself. Where do you have the resources? A lot of naysaying. And so I just didn't buy into it. And I did the same thing that I had been taught to do. I delegated to people who knew what they were doing. I broke it down into tasks that we could produce results and move on to the next. And the result has been Pacific Northwest Surgical Outreach. And it is an organization that has grown in the last 4 years into something that has gone beyond my expectations. It's a group that includes nurses and medical students from this area in Yakima, and we're all based here in Yakima, and has conducted surgical missions in Africa, Central and South America, as well as going back to Haiti. So we have been to South Sudan a couple times, and that's an incredible experience. It's the newest country on earth. It's constantly in the news for all the border disputes and the tribal feuds, but there are some fantastic folks there, and it was a pleasure going there. The Amazonian forests of Peru in Iquitos is another place that we've gone twice and really had a great time. And of course, we've been to Guatemala a couple times, and then back to Haiti. So it has been above and beyond our expectations. And one of the things that has happened as an evolution from this is we've thought about the next step. What do we do next to really propagate this? What can we do? What idea can we really bring to fruition? And we have some ideas. And I want to create a permanent surgical teaching position in South Sudan. And we're working towards that. And it's not surprising I'm hearing the same old voices. How do you think you're going to be able to do that? Where's the resources going to come from? And all that. And so when they ask me, just how do you think you're going to do this? My response is one rest step at a time. Thank you very much.